Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
I'd like to talk about a humanitarian crisis. We know about a humanitarian crisis in the Middle East with all the wars going on, but now it's spreading. It's a consequence of the Mideast crisis there, and now affecting Europe, and it has to do with immigrants, and America has a little bit of experience with immigrants coming in, and it's the country that is targeted is Turkey, and I mean the country is
Hungary. Yeah,
they're all going to Hungary right now.
Yeah.
But I'd like to point that out on the map if we could to show exactly where they're coming from and where they're going. And there's a pretty good map on this. And Hungary is in the center of Europe, and yet a lot of the immigrants are coming from the Middle East and Africa. And it looks like things are getting much worse. How many people are going into Hungary right now?
Well, they say about 3,000 a month are coming in. Already actually 3,000 a day. Already 150,000 have gone into Hungary, and they go up through they go through Greece, and then they go up through Macedonia, you can see on the map, and then through Serbia, and then up into Hungary. And then Hungary is sort of their launching pad into Germany and other countries that are more wealthy countries in Western Europe.
Well, when I look at the map, it always fascinates me. Why are they going to Hungary? They're going great distances. Why don't they stop in Italy? Why don't they stop in Greece and these different places? It must be the local governments there that have resisted it.
Well, the ones that are going through Greece, by EU law, they should be registered as refugees there. And that's the problem that Hungary's having, is that really Greece is a basket case. As we know, they can't control anything. And so they're not registering them as refugees because they have no way of taking care of them. So Hungary is facing hundreds of thousands of people sleeping in the train station. Transportation is ground to a halt, and they don't know what to do with them. The EU is providing no guidance whatsoever except to criticize them when they try to send them on or prevent them from sending them on. No matter what they do, they're getting criticized. So
it's also fascinating to me to hear the promise from the German government, oh, we'll take in 800,000. And I just wonder how serious they are. I mean, that would relieve, Hungary a little bit if they were going to take a lot of these. But for some reason, I can't see that happening. And did they really check with the German people to accept that many? That would be a big thing for Germany to deal with, too.
Imagine some small German village overrun with people who really share nothing in common. But, on the other side of the coin is David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the UK, who said, we're not taking any. We've had it. When it comes time for them, of course, to ride along and bomb these places that cause all the chaos, they're first in line. But when it comes time to face the unintended or intended consequences of the chaos, they say, no, we don't want any refugees.
Well, I think the crisis we're seeing right now was probably not an intended consequence by the neocons, but the neocons and our foreign policy has some responsibility that they should assume, because where these immigrants, the large number coming from the Middle East, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria now, and Syria's been in total chaos, and they're leaving. So it's a failed policy there. But it's also very likely a failed policy of Europe. I was always skeptical of a unified Europe. Not that you couldn't have a unified Europe if you had an understanding of free trade and friendship with neighboring countries, but to try to make it one country and try to get all the different factions to come together is chaotic. And now I think we're witnessing this because there's no absorption of even a few people, and there's it looks like I think could be the lead to the breakup of the European Union, just as the economic factors are leading to this breakup as well.
Already the strains are being felt strongly. The Schengen Agreement, which is the mechanism by which within the EU there are no borders, so there's free travel of goods and people within the EU. Essentially, it breaks down national sovereignty. You don't police your own border. But that is now breaking down in Italy, where a lot of migrants, as we saw from the map earlier, have gone up through Italy, and from Italy they want to go into Germany, and Italy has asked to suspend the Schengen agreements at that point in northern Italy to stop some of this migration.
There's a lot of different types of humanitarian crises. I mean, you can have natural disasters, you can have hurricanes and tsunamis, and you can have all these other natural things that really causes a crisis. But this is man-made. This is government-made. This is a consequence of bad foreign policy and bad economic policy. And it's, as far as I'm concerned, all preventable. And yet nobody stops and thinks about, how did the policies, did we have how much have we contributed to this? And I think that's the only thing beneficial that could come from this if we reassessed our policies and other countries did the same thing.
Well, you know, the mainstream media loves to focus on this as if it was a crisis that simply appeared out of nowhere.
Right.
They'll show poor people's faces, they've traveled, children and babies, and they act as if it just sort of like a mushroom. It just grew up in the grass one morning. They never look at what were the causative factors. And of course, when you come to Libya and Syria, you have a US and EU policy of regime change and destabilization. They say that half the population of Syria has fled the country because of these last 4 years of US regime change policy. But of course, when the media even mentions it at all, they'll say, well, two things: it's all Assad's fault, or B, if we had only gone in there and invaded right away and overthrew, then it wouldn't have happened.
And of course, the European Union compounds these problems because there's supposed to be no borders. If you're a citizen of one country, you're supposed to be able to travel back and forth. So all they have to do is plant themselves down in one country, and this really gives them access to the European Union entirely. And that is now, you know, a major factor. And as you say, the British don't want them, and I don't think the German people are going to want them. And then this is going to lead to even more trouble. You know, it's a long way from changing foreign policy and maybe introducing people to free market economics. Maybe the economic factors would be diminished a great deal. And of course, the chaos and the killing that goes on that we so often participate in, that wouldn't exist either.
It's hard to rebuild the economy after, for example, in Libya, all the infrastructure was targeted. So we talk about bringing them democracy and freedom, but you destroy any possibility for them to rebuild their economies.
Yeah. So, well, you know, we've mentioned now about the chaos in the Middle East, dealing with Syria and Iraq and that whole area. And right now, we get more news from, I thought, somewhat discredited General Petraeus. Now they're talking to him, and he has a solution for all this. He thinks that what we ought to do is use Al-Qaeda to defeat ISIS.
Yeah, exactly. He was in charge of the CIA when the regime change was launched in 2011, the U.S. efforts. And now, as of this last week, he's caused a bit of a stir because he thinks that we should embrace Al-Qaeda now in our fight against ISIS. And I was wondering as I read it, you know, because you remember the authorization for the use of military force in the NDAA. I'm wondering if he's about to be droned for saying such a thing.
Yeah, and he also claims that he was successful in Iraq with the surge. And look at what's happening in Iraq. And you know, our government right now hasn't said, oh yeah, we're going to listen to Petraeus. There's a little hands off. But the fact that he's out there and getting public attention, he's putting these issues out, but they've been involved with this Mickey Mouse around, favoring one faction against another faction. So it's the same old story. To think that David Petraeus has an answer to this is totally bizarre. If we do what he says, we're going to have more refugees. It's going to get much bigger, and there'll be no signs of this ever being resolved.
And not only him, but Ambassador Robert Ford, who was the U.S. ambassador in Syria, who took an active role in supporting the coup and the attacks on the Syrian government. He says we need to talk to actually a different Al-Qaeda faction, not the Nusra faction. So it shows that they're absolutely desperate. They were absolutely sure this would be a cakewalk, like they said about Iraq, and now when it's turned into a disaster, they want to look for something. They want to blame someone. They're desperate for something.
Yeah, they're desperate enough to go back to the guy that helped create the monster. And yet, the message here is what we have been doing has been a complete failure. And they're not quite saying that, but that's what they're admitting. And it's back and forth, more of the same thing. So, and then you talk to a neocon or listen to them on TV. You listen to Lindsey Graham, troops on the ground, the Cheneys, they're pumping it up, and more troops and more money and more war. And it seems like they're rarely challenged in a serious way on the convention media. They just accept this stuff. And even in the campaign right now, how many of the candidates are saying, you know, back off a little bit?
Well, you know, the way they portray it is that, if we had only gone in more, but the fact of the matter is you don't have to love Assad to recognize that before 2011, half the people in the country weren't leaving. So whether he's a good guy or a bad guy, it doesn't matter from our perspective. This disaster wasn't happening.
Well, I think that was a similar circumstance with Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, when he was being challenged by outsiders, he went and literally and physically passed out rifles to all his citizens, and so therefore he was not threatened by the citizens, he was threatened by outsiders. And the same way with Assad, he's far from perfect, but think of where it is right now, and it is a mess. But I see no way that things can be improved as long as we pursue this foreign policy, because of all those groups. We're with one group one day and against them the next day, and there's new groups all lining up of who's going to be in charge when Assad finally goes, which is an obsession with us. We have to get rid of them. But they come together with one issue, one reason why they remain in the fight and at times work with each other, and that's get rid of foreign invaders. They want to get rid of the foreign invaders, and about 99% of the foreign invaders are U.S. soldiers and U.S. policymakers and U.S. bombs and U.S. interference.
Yes, exactly. And remember, Petraeus' 2007 surge, this great victory that the press still talks up, it involved arming a lot of these Sunni tribesmen who later went on and became ISIS and started fighting against us. So
right. It's a shame to see what has happened here so far in this new century, because the last century sort of ended with a victory that defeated communism. I think that was the greatest victory of the 20th century. After all the Nazism and fascism and communism, the events showed that communism did not work. Unfortunately, we jumped to the conclusion that we had an empire to defend, and Keynesian economics would solve all our problems. Print money, spend money, debt doesn't matter, and we will bring peace to the world, and we'll make them all good Democrats. But right now, what I see, and this crisis we see in Europe, is the failure of government policies, failure of Keynesian manipulation, failure of central banking, failure of this policy that we have these troops in 150 countries. So in some ways, I think that this is in a great transition period, because this cannot continue. The big danger is what will the results be? Will it be total poverty for more and more nations and total war? Or can we wise up and say, yes, these policies have failed, and the American people should lead the charge on this. The policies are lousy, and yet they're always pouncing on more and more of this. At the same time, on economic policies, the worse the economy gets, the more they even talk about even introducing some type of socialism to this country and authoritarianism to this country. But we live in an age which is ending, and that is the Keynesian model does not work, and our empire does not work. It is a total failure out there, and it has to change. So what we need to do is present the alternative. And for me, the alternative is free markets, free society, civil liberties, and a foreign policy where we mind our own business and take care of the people here by introducing an old-fashioned idea of peace and prosperity, something that we were told about in our early years, but it seems like we have forgotten. If we did that, things could become much better in this country, and we could set a standard for the world. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and please come back soon.